Hello everyone, my name is Selenia Romani and in this video I'm going to explain the construction and the use of the present simple and present continuous. Okay, so I'd like to start with the construction of the affirmative sentence of the present simple. Okay, so the affirmative sentence of the present simple is composed by the subject in the first place and then the base form of the verb. The base form of the verb is basically the infinitive of the verb without to. An example of this sentence could be, I work in London. If the subject of the sentence is a third singular person, you should add an S to the base form of the verb. For example, she works in London. She is a third person, and we can add the S to the base form of the verb to work. Let's make a distinction between the different verbs and when to add the S and how to add the S to the verbs at the third person. So to regular verbs, you just have to add an S. For example, travel, travels, give, gives, play, plays, etc. To the verbs that end in S, double S, SH, CH, X, and O, you should add the ES. So for example, kiss, kisses, wash, washes, catch, catches, etc. And last, to the verbs that end in Y after a consonant, you should change the Y to an I and add ES. For example, study becomes studies, fly, flies, etc. Okay. I'd like to move on to the negative form of the present simple. So at the first place, we always have our subject, and after the subject, we have to add the auxiliary verb, which is do plus not, and which in the contractive form becomes don't. And then we can add the verb at the base form. So for example, we can say, they don't go to school on Saturdays. Of course, when the subject is a third singular person, we should have always the subject in the first place, and then in the place of do, we have does, and then not, which become doesn't, and then the verb at the base form. For example, he doesn't go to school on Saturdays. Notice that the letter S and that we used to find at the end of the verb in the affirmative sentence disappears in the negative sentence. So we don't say she doesn't eat chocolate, but we say she doesn't eat chocolate. The verb remains at the base form without the S. Okay, let's move on. I'd like to talk about the interrogative form and the short answers of the present simple. So the construction is, we have in the first place, we find the auxiliary verb, which is do or does if it is a third person. Then we have a subject and then the verb at the base form. For example, do they go to the same school, or does he speak French? Notice that if we use does because we have a third person, we always have to remember that we don't have to put the S to the base form of the verb because we already have does. In questions that use do or does, it is possible to give short answer two direct questions. So for example, look at the question that we already have as an example. Do they go to school? Do they go to the same school? Yes, they do. Or does she speak French? No, she doesn't. These are the short answers for the present simple. If we have a who question, questions such as who, when, where, why, which, or how, we cannot use the short answers that we've just seen above to answer to the question, but we have to put the who question in the first place of the sentence, of the interrogative form. So, for example, where do you come from? And the answer, of course, will be, for example, I'm from Italy. Or what does this word mean? It means sole. Okay, let's talk about the uses of the present simple. The first use, we usually use the present simple to talk about general truth, which means things that are always or almost always true. For example, the moon goes around the earth. The second use of the present simple is to talk about habits or things that take place regularly. For example, Hannah plays tennis twice a week. This is a habit. Or they usually eat pasta for lunch. This is a thing that can take place regularly, or another habit. We can use the present simple with frequency adverbs like always, sometimes, often, usually, occasionally, rarely, and never. For example, he often visits his grandma, or I usually get up early. And for the last thing, we can use the present simple with time expressions such as the days of the week and the times of the day. For example, on Wednesday, every day, every week, every month, every year, etc., etc. For example, we don't eat meat on Fridays, or he goes to bed at 10 p.m. every night. Let's move on. We're going to talk about the present continuous now. Here's the construction. The construction of the affirmative sentence of the present continuous is composed by the subject in the first place, and then we have the auxiliary verb to be, which is, of course, at the present tense. And then we have the verb with the ing form. So, for example, she is driving to work. Since we have different spelling changes for the verb in the ing form, here's a nice table that I've found that can help you to divide and learn the different verbs. Okay, let's move on. Okay, now we're going to talk about the negative form of the present continuous. Okay, so we have the construction. Of course, we have our subject in the first place. Then we have the verb to be at the present tense and not, plus the verb in the ing form. An example could be, it isn't raining anymore, or we aren't working at the moment. Of course, I've already put the verb to be at the present tense with not. They're already put in the contractive form. And we can quickly move on to the present continuous, to the interrogative form and the short answers. So we have, of course, the to be at the present tense in the first place, then the subject and the verb in ing, and of course the short answer. So is the cost of life rising up? Yes, it is, or no, it isn't. Here we have the same issue with the who question that we had with the present simple. So if you find a question with a who question in the first place, then of course we can't answer with a short answer. So the example is, how are you getting on with your new job? And the answer is, not bad, thanks. And now let's talk about the uses. First use of the present continuous is to talk about things that are happening at the moment of speaking. For example, I'm working at the moment. Second use is for temporary situations. For example, Kate is learning Italian because she wants to work in Italy. Is learning, but perhaps she isn't learning Italian at the time of speaking, probably not in this moment. Then we have annoying habits, usually with words like always, continually, constantly, and never. For example, they are always arguing. She is constantly missing the train. These are annoying habits, and you can use the present continuous. And as a last thing, we can use a present continuous with expressions like today, this week, this year, now, at the moment, at present, etc. For example, I'm working in London this week. Okay, thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed this video and that you are going to watch more of these videos.